Senator from Utah.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask unanimous consent that Martin Pippins, the detailee on the Senate Committee on Finance, be granted floor privileges for the duration of the Congress.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I'm releasing a chairman's mark for the Senate version of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, legislation that is the culmination of years of effort to reform our nation's tax code. Now, we've been at this a long time, and this marks a significant step forward in this effort. While we refer to this document as a chairman's mark, it has really been a group effort with significant input from all the Republican members of the Finance Committee and great work from all of our staff. I want to thank everyone involved for their hard work as well as their feedback, perspectives, advice, and ideas. The last time Congress enacted a comprehensive overhaul of the tax code back in 1986, President Reagan famously noted that the American people would finally have a tax code they could be proud of. And in 1986, that was likely true. At that time, updates to the tax code were necessary to keep pace with the technological and geopolitical changes our nation had been facing. That sounds pretty familiar, Mr. President. It is, after all, what we've been saying for the last several years. The world of 1986 was vastly different from the world we live in today. Advances in the past 3 decades have been monumental. Yet our tax code has not advanced, and it is failing us. The American people have dealt with years of stagnating wages, sluggishness in labor markets, and weak growth in the economy. Businesses are fleeing our country to find more favorable conditions in other countries. We've been working for years to address these issues and to meet the needs of the 21st century global economy. Fortunately, we now find ourselves in a position to make good on all of these years of hard work. A big part of that is the fact that our current president is fully engaged on tax reform, unlike his most recent predecessor. So we have been focused this year on providing middle-class tax relief, reforming the business tax system, and fixing our obscenely outdated international tax regime. The mark we're releasing today will accomplish all of these goals and more. It will reduce individual rates across the board and direct substantial relief to low and middle-income families and workers. It will bring down corporate tax rates, a goal long shared by Republicans and Democrats, and provide businesses with new opportunities for growth and expansion. And it will modernize our international tax system, bringing to an end our worldwide tax regime, a relic that should have been retired many years ago. But we have been laser focused, Mr. President, on reducing taxes for the middle class. And that is exactly what this will do. Combined, these changes to our broken tax code and the chairman's mark will give hardworking taxpayers across the country bigger paychecks and more opportunities. They will grow our economy, raising wages and improving the standard of living for all Americans. And they will once again make America the best place in the world to create, grow, and keep business, where we create more jobs and sustain a vibrant, growing economy. I have more to say on the specifics of the mark in the coming days, Mr. President. For now, I just want to give my colleagues on the Finance Committee an opportunity to share their thoughts on the steps we're taking today. Before we get to that, I do want to acknowledge the elephants in the room. Only Republicans will be standing up today to speak in favor of the mark, and I expect we'll hear some negative comments from our friends on the other side of the aisle soon enough. On that point, I'll just reiterate what I've said many times in the past. Our desire from the outset of this endeavor has been to have Democrats join us in this effort. I have personally invited my colleagues to come to the table to share their views and to work with us in good faith. Yet I expect that we'll hear a lot about supposed process fouls in the coming days. But let me make it clear to anyone listening. As chairman of the Senate's Tax Writing Committee, I haven't turned anyone away from the process. I haven't refused to listen to anyone's ideas or suggestions. And I continue to say with conviction that I'm still willing to have them on board and hope that they'll be willing to get on board and join us in this effort. A critical objective in the effort is to provide relief and support to the large swath of Americans in the middle class who have been left behind, without economic gain or opportunities for growth. Our tax reform efforts represented in the chairman's mark put forward today show that we are listening to those calling out for relief. We have an historic opportunity to help, and that opportunity should not be squandered by anyone on either side of the aisle for cheap political points. And with that, Mr. President, I'm grateful to be a member of this body. I'm grateful to be chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, which is a very powerful and hardworking committee, both Republicans and Democrats. And I'm grateful to make these remarks today. And with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The senator from Iowa.
the last time that Congress really did the big job that's before us right now was 1986. Did quite a bit to modernize the tax code. So that's 30 years ago. In the generation since, the tax code has grown out of control. Everybody knows that. It's been a dream come true for accountants and lobbyists that make their living from certain provisions of that tax code. But for the American taxpayer, the gigantic tax code is not a dream, but a nightmare for most Americans. This has helped the powerful and the well-connected, but it's hurt the American workers. It's hurt American industry, and it hurts Americans' ability to compete with the rest of the world. So the bill unveiled today takes a real giant step forward to make our tax code simpler, fairer, and more competitive. It catches us up with our major trading partners who have been lowering business tax rates while we've stood still, and keeps us uncompetitive. It gives us an opportunity to export more when we're competitive in the global economy. This bill will also help bring back jobs and create new ones. It will boost American wages by promoting economic growth and incentivizing investment. The centerpiece of the legislation is where it ought to be, in the center of our population, middle-class America, so it has middle-class tax cuts. The average middle-class family of four would see a tax cut of more than $1,400. An increase in the child tax credit of $650 above the $1,000 that's already there per child would mean real help for working parents. Nearly doubling the standard deduction means that many lower-income Americans will be removed from the tax rolls completely, and the tax filing season will be much simpler for millions more. Small businesses will also see significant tax relief from the rate reduction on the individual side, but also from an innovative new small business income tax deduction, because 2/3 of the jobs in this country are created by those very same small businesses, and we ought to give them some better equity with big C corporations. It will provide much-needed tax relief to nearly all small businesses, down to the smallest family-owned corner store and family farmer. Our bill recognizes the importance of small businesses in our economy. After all, as I just said, They're responsible for a majority of those new jobs. The tax savings they receive could be spent on a new hire. It could be spent on giving raises to employees in those same small businesses. It could be invested in a growing company. All this adds up to Americans seeing more now hiring signs throughout our country. Landmark tax relief during the Kennedy and Reagan administrations grew wages, created jobs, and made the United States more competitive. So there's enough history behind what we're trying to do to know that it will accomplish the goals that we accomplish, or that we're trying to accomplish. Today, Congress has a golden opportunity to do again what was done in Kennedy in the Reagan years, and it has not been done for 30 years. Tax cuts, tax simplification, and tax reform. I yield the floor.
Carolina.
President, today is a good day. We have both the House and the Senate working on tax reform that will have a positive impact for your everyday, hard-working Americans. This is truly a good day. So often when you hear us talk about tax reform, it sounds like a lot of numbers. I'm not sure how excited or enamored people get with numbers, but I'm the kind of guy that believes that tax reform is not about numbers. Tax reform is about everyday Americans being able to keep more of their hard-earned money. Tax reform is about families like the one I grew up in, single-parent households, working paycheck to paycheck, year in and year out, praying and hoping for something good to happen. Today is good news for those single moms and single dads out there. It's also good news for the working class families, dual income, making around $75,000 a year, working every day, trying to make sure they have a little left over for dinner out. We want to say to those folks who haven't really had a raise in a decade, we hear you. We feel your pain. We want to deliver to our American family the opportunity to see more money in each paycheck. This is good. And for folks who are looking to start businesses, we have a Christmas surprise for you too. We've lowered taxes on the average family, about $1,500 a year, $100 or so a month. Here's what that means for a family where you're in a single-parent household. You bring home about $450 a paycheck. That could easily become an extra 10% a paycheck. That's a lot of money to a single-parent household. We've also expanded the child tax credit to make sure that those folks in the middle income brackets are able to keep more of their hard-earned money. Because if there is a focus on our tax reform package, it's to make sure that middle America, hard-working income earners have a chance to see more money materialize in their paychecks. We've also simplified the tax code. People say, well, how did you do that? There are 7 brackets. I understand. It's simple. Simplification means you do not have to itemize. Said differently, 9 out of 10 taxpayers will be able to use the expanded standard deduction to figure out their tax burden, as opposed to going item by item by item and understanding whether or not you can withdraw it or subtract it from your income. I had the great pleasure to be a small business owner before entering Congress. And for many of those small business owners. They represent the backbone of our economy. Most jobs created in the future will be created by a small business owner. We are going to lower your taxes so you can hire more people and make long-term investments into building the greatest economy this country has known in more than a generation. This is a good day, and we have good news.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I agree with the senator from South Carolina. This is indeed a good day for the families that will benefit from this additional money in their paycheck, from the increased standard of living that they will enjoy, and for those of us who want to see businesses come back home from abroad. They've fled this country because of we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And when we say we want to reform that broken corporate tax rate and to bring those businesses and that money home, we join our colleagues ranging from the Democratic leader, Senator Schumer, to Barack Obama in 2011 in a joint session to the United States Congress, advocating for bringing that business rate down so that businesses will stay in America, they'll hire Americans, and they'll improve wages for all working families. So I'm proud to join my fellow Finance Committee colleagues on the floor today to support our version of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was just released a few moments ago. I want to congratulate Chairman Hatch for his leadership, but I really am extraordinarily impressed with all of the members of the Finance Committee that worked so hard together to try to get us to where we are today. We plan for lower rates. As you've heard, we increase the standard deduction, we expand the child tax credit, and we reform the tax code so we give Americans access to more jobs and higher wages. Our Democratic colleagues have said they want tax reform too. I mentioned Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer, our colleague from New York, who've repeatedly said that we should lower the corporate rate so businesses will come home, hire Americans, and help our economy grow here. So we're all in agreement on that on a bipartisan basis. And there is room for further agreement. I agree with the chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Hatch. We invite our Democratic colleagues to come together and join us, particularly and starting on the Finance Committee on Monday. If what we want is more better paying jobs, and we do, then we have to focus on lowering rates on all the job creators, including small businesses, as you've heard. And the framework we've developed was designed to cut taxes for middle-class families, not millionaires. It's to help small businesses grow and create more jobs. It's to provide relief for hard-working families by increasing the standard deduction, which, as our colleague from South Carolina pointed out, 1 out of 10 taxpayers will now have to itemize deductions in order to take full advantage of the law, to reduce their tax burden. So it'll be simpler, easier to comply with, and lower their tax rate while enhancing the child tax credit. These reforms will make the 1,000-page tax code easier to understand and comply with. Our efforts will simplify what now pages upon pages of language only tax lawyers and lobbyists understand. So I look forward to continuing the important discussions when the Senate Finance Committee marks up and amends this proposal starting Monday. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, it is a good day here in the United States Senate because today we released our tax reform legislation, and soon we hope to have a final bill on the President's desk. Well, Mr. President, when you first think about coming to Washington to serve, you dream about fixing big problems and making a real difference in people's lives. Well, Mr. President, today we get to make a big difference. And I hearken back, I looked in the chamber here, to 1986, the last time the tax reform was actually passed through the Senate and signed into law by the President. Senator Hatch, the chairman of our committee, was a member of the Senate at that time. Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, Senator Grassley, who you just heard from, were all here to vote on that. I was here as a young staffer. At that time, I didn't have kids of my own. And today I'm a grandfather. So a lot of time has passed, and tax reform is long overdue. But the whole point of this exercise, Mr. President, is to give hope to future generations of Americans, to give them a better opportunity and a better life, to improve their standard of living and their quality of life. And in order for that to happen, we need to be taking the steps here, putting policies in place that will create the conditions that are favorable to economic growth, to the creation of better paying jobs and higher wages. Today, Mr. President, we get to bring relief to the parents who are wondering if they'll be able to afford a new car that they need to fit their growing family. Today, we get to bring relief to the single mom who's wondering how she's going to pay the rent next month. As our colleague from South Carolina talked about, those parents and families that are literally living paycheck to paycheck. Today, we get to bring relief to the middle-aged couple worrying about a secure retirement. To the small business owner who doesn't know how he can meet his tax bill and still make his mortgage payment. To the family farmer who's worried that he won't be able to pass down his farm to his daughter. Mr. President, the comprehensive tax reform legislation that we've introduced today will provide immediate, direct relief to hardworking Americans. It will immediately increase their take-home pay. And it will immediately simplify the tax code so that it's easier for Americans to figure out what benefits they qualify for, and so they don't have to spend a lot of time and money filing their taxes. But, Mr. President, that's really just the beginning. Our bill is also going to reform the business side of the tax code to give Americans access to the jobs, to the wages, and to the opportunities that will set them up for a secure future. We're going to make it easier for small businesses to raise wages and to hire new workers. We're going to end the outdated tax framework that is driving American companies to keep jobs and profits overseas. And we're going to make it easier for companies to invest in American jobs and American workers. Mr. President, it's been a rough few years for our economy and for the American people. A lot of Americans haven't had a pay raise literally in almost a decade. But with this tax reform legislation, we can ensure that it doesn't stay that way. The American people deserve a tax code that works for them and not against them, that grows their paychecks instead of shrinking them, that expands their opportunities instead of eliminating them. And that's exactly what we're going to give them starting today. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, today is America's lucky day. We all know what the definition of luck is. Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And we're very lucky as a country, and we're very lucky as a Senate, that our Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, was where he is and is where he is at the time he is. Because it was his vision a few years ago that the tax issue was going to emerge as a central issue in the growth and development of our country. And unless we've met our challenges of our tax code, opened up opportunity for our public, expanded opportunity for our businesses, then America could succumb to a high tax system without productivity. We also got lucky because Senator McConnell picked a man to be chairman of this committee, Orrin Hatch, who brought years of experience in the United States Senate and the compassion that Orrin Hatch has as a Mormon and as an American to a tax code that is by no means compassionate. It was always complex, to make it simpler and fairer, pro-family and pro-jobs. Let me tell you something, there are a lot of disappointed people overseas right now because those that have been picking our pockets by inverting American corporations to foreign systems because their taxes were lower than ours are out of luck. Now those people are going to be incentivized to come to America, make investments in our country, expand opportunities and jobs in our country. No longer will companies invert to leave America, and companies will invest to be more American. That's fantastic, and that's why this is a pro-jobs tax bill. It's going to create a lot of opportunity. And opportunity is what Americans want and what Americans need. For the average American family, and let me talk about my family for a second. I think I'm pretty average. My wife and I are fortunate to have 3 great children, 9 great grandchildren. I was lucky enough to work in a small LLC, limited limited partnership, real estate brokerage company, mom and pop brokerage company. My wife taught in public schools. Our children went to the University of Georgia and to the public schools of our community. We saved for their education. We did everything we could to invest in hope for them in the future, and today they're all gainfully employed. They're all happy, but they're all struggling like everybody else is with a burdensome tax system, with less opportunity than we'd like for them to have. By simplifying the tax system, by making it fair as we've done here, we're giving more opportunity to my grandchildren and my children and more opportunity to America. Lastly, I want to make this point. There are only two ways to raise taxes or raise revenue. One is to charge more. That means you raise somebody's taxes. The other way to do it is to create opportunity. So people create companies and jobs because the opportunity is there. And when you create opportunity, and when jobs are created, revenues increase. And when people do better in their jobs, their incomes go up. And when companies have people that do better in their jobs, they expand. And when they expand, they produce more revenue that becomes taxable. So we raise our revenue, but not by lowering expectations, but by raising opportunity for our people and for our children. So we're very lucky as Americans today. I'm very lucky to be in this United States Senate today. We're lucky to have had leaders in place at a time that it was right to address our country's biggest challenge and do it the right way. You know, when I was in the Georgia legislature, I sat next to an old-time wool hat politician who ran the Ways and Means Committee of the Georgia legislature. I'll never forget one day he and I were sitting side by side as we were listening to a gentleman make a speech in the well. And the gentleman in the well paused a minute to try and make a point, and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me tax your memory." My old friend, the wool hat politician, said, "Damn, I wish I'd have thought of that." That's the way we've done taxes in this country for a long time, just tax people's memory, or tried to look for an opportunity to tax something for us. What we're doing here is we're creating opportunity, we're raising revenue through prosperity. Americans will raise the revenue for their pocket first, before the country gets the revenue second. So it's our lucky day, lucky to have good leaders, lucky to live in the greatest country on the face of this earth. And if we do our job, we pass this bill before the end of this year and change the tax code of the United States of America to a fairer pro-jobs, pro-family tax code, then we will have made our contribution to history at a time it was our opportunity. I hope we never will be said that we let our country down when that opportunity was available to us. And I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I want to echo the message of the senator from Georgia. This is a terrific opportunity. This is a very big day. It's a big step forward on our path to restoring the economic growth that we've been waiting for all this time. I am really excited about this step forward and the remainder of the process to get this done, to get this bill signed into law. Why do we need this? Mr. President, we've just lived through the weakest recovery in American history. Feeble growth, stagnant wages, and a widening gap between the wealthy and the poor. That's what's been happening for years. Now, some people say, well, that's just the way it is. You just need to get used to it. That's the new normal. That's what America's about now. Mr. President, that is complete nonsense. There is nothing inevitable about the American economy being weak and denying opportunity for the people that we represent. It's a direct result of bad policy, failed policy that prevented us from having the recovery that we would normally have after a recession. What was that policy? Well, we saw it. It's very clear. It's not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of fact that productivity growth in America collapsed. It's a matter of fact that investment in the kind of new plants and equipment that allow for productivity to grow collapsed. It's a fact that new business startups just dried up. People weren't able and willing to do it. There's no mystery about why our economy was so weak for so many years. We had imposed conditions that made it impossible to have the kind of growth that's normal. And meanwhile, what was happening in the rest of the world? The rest of the world was systematically making their tax codes more competitive. The countries that we compete with around the world in Europe and Asia, they were lowering the rates that they applied to business income. They were simplifying their codes, and they were moving to international systems that made it more conducive for them to generate investment into their countries, while we did nothing except let our tax code just ossify. That's what's been happening these last many years, Mr. President, and what I'm excited about is this bill fixes exactly what's broken. This bill goes to exactly where the problem is and begins to turn this around. So how do we do that? One of the things that we do, a hallmark of this bill, is we're going to lower the cost of investing in the new plants and equipment that will allow American workers to become more productive. More productive workers get paid more in wages. That's just a fact. That's what's going to happen as a result of this bill. Another thing that we do in this bill is we get away from this terrible policy we have that's resulting in foreign companies buying up American companies. The way we treat income earned overseas is a disaster, and we're the only country in the world that does it. I think you could make a case that today the United States has what might very well be the least attractive tax regime in the modern world, in the industrialized world. And what's really exciting about this, Mr. President, is we're going to move from this system to what just might be the best tax system in the industrialized world. Think about the result that's going to have. The result is going to be, I think, breathtaking. New investment, new businesses being launched, existing business growing. Take foreign direct investment alone. You know, if you think about it, we've got a global economy. Capital can move around the world with literally the click of a mouse, and people make investment decisions based on the climate of the place they're thinking about investing in. When you've got the worst tax regime in the world, who really wants to invest here? When we've got the best, how are we not going to attract investment from all around the world, including very much in the United States? So the changes we're making are exactly the right changes for this moment. But that's true in another respect, Mr. President, and that is if you think about where we are in this cycle. It's taken way, way too long to get here, but the unemployment rate is quite low now. We're getting close to full employment. So what happens when we create the incentives for business to grow, to invest, new businesses to launch, people to invest in America? What happens when that occurs in an environment where the unemployment rate is very low? It sets up a bidding war for workers. There's no other choice. These businesses, as they grow, they need new employees to get this job done. They have to pay ever more because they're competing with another business down the road that also wants to grow, also wants to invest in new plants and equipment. What we're going to do is create a bidding war for workers. That means wages are going up. And when wages go up, families have more take-home pay. And when they have more take-home pay, they have a higher standard of living. This is exactly how people have a chance to live the American dream. When the economy is thriving and growing at the rate that America used to take for granted. Well, Mr. President, I'm here to say those days are coming back. We've got some work to do. We're not done yet by any means, but I am confident we're going to get this done. And when we do, our constituents are going to live a better life as a result. I yield the floor.
The senator from Ohio.
Mr. President, I really enjoyed listening to my colleague from Pennsylvania talk about this new tax reform plan that's just been unveiled by the Finance Committee here. He's right. This is really exciting because it's an opportunity, after a lot of talk over a lot of years, to finally fix our tax code. And it is broken. And it's broken in a lot of different respects, but one that he pointed out so well is the fact that we actually have jobs and investment going overseas because of our tax code. It's a responsibility of the people who are in this body and in the House and the presidency to actually fix that. No one else can do it. Workers in America, including my home state of Ohio, are competing with one hand tied behind their back because we have a tax code that encourages other companies from foreign countries to come in and buy our companies, to take our business, to take our market share, to make it harder for U.S. workers to be able to compete and win. So I think it's way past time, frankly, for us to fix that. People say, well, we haven't reformed the tax code in 31 years and it's about time. I agree with that. But if you go back to the international part of our tax code that creates a lot of these problems, you got to go back to John F. Kennedy, who last reformed it. That means that part of our tax code should qualify for AARP benefits. That's how old it is. So it's time for us to fix this, and it is really exciting that we finally have that opportunity. So there are three parts of this tax reform proposal, all three of which are really important. The first is a tax cut for the middle class. Why is that important? Because right now, even with the economy that's starting to grow a little bit, what's happening? Well, wages are flat. So expenses are up across the board. The biggest expense, by the way, Mr. President, one you've been involved with, is health care. People are seeing their health care costs go up, their premiums, their deductibles, their copays, and yet their wages aren't going up. That creates a middle-class squeeze, but it's more than health care. It is food. It is everyday purchases. It is tuition if you're trying to send your kid to school. Those have skyrocketed. So let's do something to actually give the family budget a little help. That's the middle-class tax cuts that are in this proposal. You probably saw today that the middle-class tax cut alone provides, on average, $1,458 for every family. That's a median family income family. Well, someone in the hall asked me, gosh, you know, one of the reporters here, $1,500 a family, why does that matter? I said, well, it matters a lot if you're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe you're not, but a lot of people are who I represent. And that $1,500 is something that will help them to be able to make ends meet and maybe begin to save a little bit for a vacation or for retirement or for the ability to make that car payment. So I think this is really important. I would say, though, beyond just that important middle-class tax cut, there's something else that ought to be considered, which is if we do this right, the way this has been laid out by the Finance Committee, what's going to happen is we're going to help to create more jobs and higher wages. My colleague from Pennsylvania talked about this. With a relatively tight labor market, as you have more investment into these businesses, what's going to happen? Everyone says you're going to see wages go up. So the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan group here, and the Joint Committee on Taxation, a nonpartisan group here, have looked at all this, and they've said, yeah, there's going to be a benefit actually to workers if we do these business tax cuts to be able to get the business rate down below the average of the other industrialized country, rather than being the highest business rate in the entire industrialized world, which it is now, because that's going to attract more jobs and investment here, and we'll stop losing jobs and investment. There's some economists who have looked at this too, and they agree this is going to benefit workers. In fact, there's a couple economic studies out there that show that families will get an additional $4,000 on average per family. Again, we're talking about middle-class families here from the benefits that are going to come from more investment and more jobs and higher earnings that are going to happen in the business world. So it's not just about the middle-class tax cuts, as important as they are. That's tax relief going right to the bottom line. You'll be able to figure it out. Go online, use the tax calculator, figure out what it means for you, but also remember these other reforms in an outdated tax code that is just crying out for improvement and reform is going to result in additional benefits flowing to you and your family as well, if we do this right, and we have to do it right. There's a study that came out recently. It was from a firm called Ernst & Young, and it looked at what's happened in America over the past decade or so. And they've said in the last 13 years, there are 4,700 American companies that have become foreign companies because of our tax code that would still be American companies today if we put in place the kind of tax reform we're talking about. 20% rate, below that average of the other industrialized countries, and this system, this international system that allows you to be more competitive. 4,700 companies. Think about that. There's other data out there that says twice as many foreigners are buying U.S. companies as U.S. companies can buy foreign companies. Why? Because of our tax code. And it's just true. I mean, this is something that's been happening in this country not just in the last couple of years, but really the last couple of decades. It's time for us to catch up. America needs to get back in a leadership position. And if we do that, we're going to see more jobs and more investment coming here to this country rather than going overseas. Finally, the third thing this does that is so important is it levels the playing field internationally. Right now, we have between $2.5 and $3 trillion of earnings, money, from American companies that are trapped overseas. Those companies aren't bringing it back. Why? Because of our tax code. So this tax reform proposal actually says to those companies, we want that money back here. We want you to invest in America. We want you to create jobs here, expand plant and equipment, bring your intellectual property, your patents back here, and then send that export out from America. That'll create jobs here, including good jobs in research and development. That's what this proposal does as well. It levels that playing field internationally to tell the foreign companies and the foreign nations that are taking advantage of our current tax code, you know what? That's not going to happen anymore. That's done. We now are going to have a competitive tax code where we're encouraging money to come here to this country. And that money coming back here and invested in this country will also raise the economic condition for the entire country. Economic growth will go up. And again, that filters down to all of us, including every family that I represent. So that's why I'm excited about this. I think it's overdue. I wish we could have done this earlier, you know, not just last year, but 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Orrin Hatch is in the hall tonight, and Senator Hatch has been talking about this for a few decades. And he's been saying we've got to fix this thing. He's now chairman of the Finance Committee. He can do it. Senator McConnell, who's going to speak here in a minute, has been talking about this for a long time. We've had commissions on it. We've had working groups on it. We had bipartisan working groups, 5 of them, a year and a half ago that were formed. And those five working groups looked at this issue. I co-chaired one of those working groups. It was on the international side. And guess what? On a bipartisan basis, we said, we've got to have this lower tax rate. We've got to go to this more competitive international system. And you know who the co-chair of that working group was? One Republican, one Democrat on all these working groups. It was Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, who now is the Democratic leader. So this has not been a partisan issue in the past. On the international side, at least, let's figure out how we can come together and get Republican and Democratic support to be able to tell the workers of America, you're no longer going to have to compete with one hand tied behind your back. We're going to give you the tools to be able to be successful for you and your family so you can achieve your American dream. Mr. President, I'm excited about this. Let's move forward. Look forward to the Finance Committee next week and bring it to the floor. And I hope we can have support on both sides of the aisle to get this done. I yield back my time.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, the distinguished chairman of our Finance Committee is on the cusp of the accomplishment of his career. This comprehensive tax reform will make a huge difference for America, and I just want to commend him for the efforts that have gotten us this far. You've heard members of the Finance Committee speaking to the bill that's been presented to our conference. This is going to be an extraordinary accomplishment, not only for the American people, but for the distinguished chairman of the Finance Committee.